and understand you're making art to either redeem yourself, resolve issues you might be facing, I think art serves the greatest purpose. In many cases, it will have success in the marketplace, but it's not. I think it's not required. What is required is that you find a way to speak your truth.
The Saginaw Art Museum is currently hosting the exhibition Wonderfully Made, the Anthony and Davida Artist Collection of African American Fine Art. On the podcast here, we are listening to artists and other professionals from the arts community connected to this exhibition. Our guest today is Curlee Raven Holton, a highly regarded professor, painter, and master printmaker. Holton has exhibited his work throughout the world. His paintings, drawings, and prints are held by major museums and collections in the U.S. and abroad. Among his many accomplishments are his receipt of the Anyone Can Fly Foundation Lifetime Achievement Award and an Honorary Doctorate in Art and Philosophy from the Institute for Doctoral Studies in the Visual Arts at the 2018 Commencement in New York City. In our discussion today, you will hear more about the print process, Holton's work with Faith Ringgold, and some wisdom for artists. Curlee, thank you so much for being with us today. For our audience, can you explain a little bit about what printmaking is or is not? For somebody who may never heard of a printmaker before, can you describe that a little bit for me?
Yes. Generally, people often react to the term thinking it's an offset, mass-produced medium of expression. But for the fine artist and fine printmaker, it's a very specific kind of printmaking practice that has a long tradition. It goes back to the 18th century or beyond. And what it is basically is taking a created image, an authentic image, sometimes directly on a surface, and that surface can be metal, can be wood, can be stone, and then that surface is manipulated in such a way that that image can be transferred onto a sheet of paper from that matrix, which is the plate that holds the stable image, carved, drawn, washed, range of ways in which you can affect your image. And then that image is transferred to a sheet of paper. And that paper, in almost all cases, is 100% rag paper, archival. So the entire process is made up of high quality elements, archival elements, whether it's the ink, whether it's the paper, so that it lasts indefinitely and doesn't age and change coloration. For example, if you look at a sheet of newspaper that's been printed out, over time it'll start to change brown and deteriorate. That's the acid base in the inking process and in the paper process, making process. Well, with fine printmaking, not only is the image authentic and original, the artist is engaged in a process, normally in association with the master printmaker. So the artist may well create the original image, may manipulate the image on site, along with the printmaker. And the point, and probably the most singular aspect of it that celebrates and recognizes its quality and uniqueness is the hand of the artist is involved. The hand of the printmaker is involved. The actual rolling of the ink, the manipulation of the image, the hand is involved. When you do mechanical reproductions, facsimile, so to speak, there is no hand involved. The machine is involved. Now, there are cases where offset has been used as a fine art tool, controlling the colors, controlling the numbers of prints made. But generally, we're talking about etchings, lithographs, woodcuts, collagraphs, monotypes, a whole range of images. Of course, they're very popular with contemporary artists as a means of reaching a larger audience. So printmaking is the most democratic form of art making in that, in most cases, it's very affordable and accessible.
Tell me a little bit more about that role of the printmaker and the artist working together. When we see a finished print, a lot of times we see the credit to the artist. But from what you've described, the printmaker also has a pretty pivotal role in how that print is created.
Sure. Traditionally and historically, the printmaker collaborated with the visual artist would actually sign the print. If you go back and look at some of Picasso's prints, artists of the early 19th century, you will see both names of the artists and names of the printmaker. So for me, I'm a printmaker by practice, as you would be a painter, draftsman, sculptor. I'm a printmaker using that graphic medium to communicate my visual ideals and visual language. When this comes into concert with an artist, that printmaker now becomes the facilitator of the work of that artist, the vision and the medium and the message that that artist is involved in. And that is called a master printmaker. Now, you can be clearly just a printer, meaning that you can understand the technology and just facilitate the print. But the master printer has a unique role in that it is a collaborative role, a very intimate role, a very creative role. And that master printmaker is in many ways in the background, but is enabling that artist to create his greatest image and most powerful and successful image. An example of this is a statement by Robert Rauschenberg that he stated about his work with master printmakers. He stated that he could create more images, more unique images, and more successful images in collaboration with a master printmaker than he did on his own.
It really is interesting sort of how it's a bit of a behind the scenes activity, but so pivotal to the end result. Sort of analogy maybe of a music producer and a musician.
Nicely.
Would that be accurate?
That would be accurate, and it takes a certain personality. Artists can be very egotistical. So, in the case of the master printmaker, it is normally the kind of individual that celebrates the technology in the printmaking process, the physical connection with the material, the physical labor that's involved. It can be very satisfying. So there's a sort of low-tech integration of low technology, a printing press, a litho press that is hand-operated and pulled by hand. So you're bringing that heart, that creative insight into a relationship with the body. So it's a unique way of expressing your art. Now, some artists are not able to do this on both ends. I've had cases where an artist has come into the studio to make a print and was so intimidated by the medium because they had no prior knowledge of it that they could not actually create a work of art with any comfort. Then you had printmakers that feel as though they have to direct the artist, not facilitate, not help guide, but direct the artist. In my particular case, perhaps because of my personality, I'm able to step back and celebrate the achievement of that artist. And my greatest satisfaction is aiding that artist in achieving their goals. And most of the successful master printmakers have that type of personality profile.
Going a little deeper with that idea, you have been a printmaker for Faith Ringgold. We specifically have in our exhibition right now, Coming to Jones Road, Under a Blood Red Sky, number 6. Can you describe a little bit about how that relationship came about and maybe any insights you have into that specific print?
Yeah, I first met Faith as a visiting artist at Lafayette College, where I was a teacher of printmaking and African American art history. She came in as a residency. She walked in. She was touring the studios. And so when she toured the print studio, I had a plate prepared and laying on the table with the drawing needle right next to it and sat her down there to talk to a group of students. So she's began to doodle right on the plate. And I said, well, Faith, please just draw a full image. She drew that image, which was the first print I printed by her, Fly Me Over to the Moon. It's Anyone Can Fly, etching. And that was done in 1994. So it took a little while before I was able to edition it, and then I delivered it to her, and she began to tell me how she had worked with my mentor, Robert Blackburn, at the printmaking workshop in New York City, and how intimidating printmaking was. She just didn't get it, but she felt so comfortable working with me. We produced over 40 editions together, beginning in 1994 up into, I think 2016 was the last print that we made together. And the Jones Road series began in 2001. And this is interesting how this came about. Faith is an artist that really is inspired by her personal and cultural experience, her lived experience. that she translates into narratives and stories. And she's very well known for her ability to tell a story. But the story always has underneath it a desire to illuminate a particular dynamic, to in many ways redeem oneself from a history, especially as an African American, that the stories were redemptive and heroic. And you see it throughout her work. So she had just purchased a home in Englewood, New Jersey. She had been a longtime resident of Sugar Hill in New York City. But she purchased a home in Englewood, New Jersey, and she wanted to build a full studio onto her home. And there were neighbors that were resisting her efforts to build this and had actually went to City Hall to stop her from doing this. And of course, Faith took her lawyer with her, and she was very successful in proving that the city ordinance didn't prevent her from doing this. It was just neighbors that were threatened by this artist next door in this sort of plush neighborhood and community. So she was inspired by a view from her window. Actually, I did a book with her called A View from the Studio, looking over her backyard, and she imagined that runaway slaves were coming to her house as part of the Underground Railroad, and how she could help give them comfort and refuge. So what she was saying is that her experience with the city of Englewood and her neighbors that were threatened by her being present only inspired her to think about the stories of African Americans escaping from slavery. And that is how the first Jones Road print began, Under a Blood Red Sky. And it was a small etching, was the first one that we did with her. And we did, I think it was a series of 7 or 8.
Well, that's a incredible story, and really brings that print into an interesting context, and that relationship that you have, and being able to bring the vision into reality. I'm curious to hear from yourself what kinds of challenges you may have faced in becoming a printmaker, and the ways that you've been able to overcome some of those challenges.
Well, my first introduction to printmaking was I was a student at the Cleveland Institute of Art in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was attempting to major in painting and minoring in drawing. And I was asked by a local activist, not just me, but other artists, to create a work of art that could be sold to raise money for the ANC, the African National Congress. This was in 87, I think it was, or 86. And I was really taken by that. Her name was Tandy. I'll never forget her. And I said, God, it would be great to be able to make a work of art that could support the ANC and to show that there was a commitment from the U.S. to help South Africans overcome this system of apartheid. So I decided to make a print. Now, how could you make an image that you could sell to multiple people? I had never made it, any prints, but I, of course, had studied Picasso and other artists that had created prints as a part of their body of work. And I was able to talk a printmaking student doing lithography to allow me to slip into the institute at night and to help instruct me on making this image. So I drew directly on the stone, washes, and they helped guide me through this and pulled that edition. It's called White Terms. And it's the images of reverse images of blacks pushing boundaries, pushing limitations away, and others pushing limitations onto them. So I was captured at that moment because it had fulfilled a number of my own personal ambitions as an artist. First, to make art for the community's sake, not for purely art's sake, but community's sake. And many African American artists are connected to that. The direct relationship between the images that they make in the context of the community, because the notion of community and struggle is so prevalent among African Americans as a way of living, a way of understanding who they are, is ubiquitous in terms of the way in which those messages are sent to you in school, in the social environment, and family. So who could make art just for art's sake? You had to make art for your community's sake. Well, also for your personal sake. So my work was to help me address some of my issues that I dealt with in negotiating the notions of identity, being an African American, being black in an institution where there were only 5 black students, an institution of 300 students. So how do you negotiate that space? So this work really fit that need for me to connect to my community, and affordability, the very democratic notion that everyone could have one, rather than a $5,000 painting that most people in my community can afford, a $100 print they could afford. Plus, the other thing, positive aspect of this is that there would be 50 people that had my work, not one, not just one, but 50 people. And it builds your reputation, and it contributes to your community. So it fit my politic, it fit my personality, and it fit my cultural agenda.
Yeah, it's interesting how sort of all those elements lined up to bring you into the art and the craft that you're involved with now. If you had a word of wisdom or a word of encouragement to young artists or artists that are just trying to establish themselves, what would you tell them?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've heard this answered in many different ways. Some very famous artists, they never take a job teaching because it taps into the same energy level. I was visiting a very great artist in Mexico, Francisco Toledo, and his question to me, the first question was, what was my project? Not necessarily what I was doing in Mexico and what I was studying in Mexico, but what was my project? What was my conviction about? What was I investigating? So I think for an artist, it's not merely to learn your craft and learn how to sing a song, or find your voice. What is important is what song you decide to sing. What is your project? What is your purpose? And why do you make this work? I think this is the advice I give you. Attempt to answer that question. If you could answer that question for yourself, then you could pursue art regardless of social recognition, being present or absent, regardless of adoration, regardless of recognition, regardless of success in the marketplace, because you are doing it for a very important purpose. In my own particular case, I pursued professional achievement and recognition, but I've always been very clear that the work that I make in my studio is my legacy, not for the world, but for my own children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, so they could walk in and see a work of art and say, that is what Papa thinks. So what I'm suggesting to you, if you can establish a conviction, a focus, a project, and understand you're making art to either redeem yourself, resolve issues you might be facing, I think art serves the greatest purpose. In many cases, it will have success in the marketplace, but it's not. I think it's not required. What is required is that you find a way to speak your truth.
I think that is such an interesting concept, especially in the current times that we're in, where it's so easy to try and develop an audience and have sort of a muddled perspective. So I appreciate those words.
The more attention the market pays to the work that's being done by artists, the broader that attention is. And the absence of a critical assessment and critical dialogue about the work, what you find is a level of mediocrity being embraced as if it is excellent. It obscures really gifted, talented people. And I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about in general. So you got to really try to cut through that, because, again, the more work becomes popular, artists become popular, the more it's accessible, the more assignment is made to it as a status symbol. Then we lose sight of the purpose, and we have to be careful about it. I think one should be the prophet, not the minister. That is living the prophecy.
Well, Curlee, thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing your story. You've left us with some incredible things to think about, and I do appreciate your time and certainly your work.
Let me close with one statement regarding Faith Ringgold. Is she clearly is someone that has followed her own voice and is a prophet and didn't need public validation to have faith in herself and her practice. She even pursued it when there was criticism of her work, that her work was infantile, that her work was unsophisticated, that she was too aggressive. She pursued it, and we can see now she is one of the most important artists in the American canon.
The Wonderfully Made exhibition is presented by Hemlock Semiconductor with additional support from Morley Companies, Wirt Rivette Group, Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, Michigan Humanities Council, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. We look forward to having you see the exhibition for yourself during your next visit. As always, we invite you to subscribe to this podcast and consider making a contribution so that we can carry out our mission of providing art for all.